All right, so let's review the correct answers for the practice assignment that you just did. So take a look here, fixing the leads. The first one, I look here and the first thing I see is a problem, two sentences, right? Remember, leads are one sentence, one sentence. So, real simple fix here. Coming down here, we're going to make it two separate paragraphs. And I do apologize, there's nothing I can do for the correct answers. It doesn't do the spacing correctly. It just kind of puts it, I can't do a space in between, so these would be two separate paragraphs. But taking a look here, two separate paragraphs. Your lead is this first one. So bottom line, anytime you have a lead that you write that you see as two or more sentences, you got to get into one. Whether that means breaking it up or whether that means combining the two sentences, finding a way to combine it and cut out some of the clutter words, get those leads to one sentence. Very, very rare is it two. And when we're just learning right now, avoid two it altogether. Second one here, if you picked up on it, all the specifics here. The person's name, his age, the street that he's on. Those, if it's not a person, a celebrity, if it's not a person of prominence, if it's sometimes in feature stories, you can use the name in the lead. Most of the time they do try to avoid it, but those are the only times you're using names or maybe specifics in the lead, or if it really makes sense to the story. You know, maybe if it's something like a 3-year-old. I don't know. I'm trying to think of something amazing that a 3-year-old could do. A 3-year-old found a way to drive a car down the street. Then maybe put the age in the lead, right? But if you don't have something that's relevant to the actual story, you're not using those. You're using what's called modifiers. The book talked about that. So instead, if you look down here at our answers, instead of saying the guy's name, the age, and street, a man was shot by Meriden police on Thursday night when he got out of a moving car. Next paragraph, then you say his name, street, and everything else. So that's the nut graph. That's where you start getting into the details. So those are the two problems with those main leads. These are hard news leads. Feature leads, for like feature stories are a little different. Can you be a little different? You can sometimes put the name in, but still, generally try to follow the one sentence rule. Even on a featured lead, it should be one sentence paragraph, and you're usually not getting the name or specifics, too many specifics in there. All right, I take a look at here, and right away, the first thing that jumps out without me even reading it is way too long of paragraphs. So remember, you're doing new paragraphs when there's a new thought or some kind of transitional sentence, right? And sometimes they can be related. I know this is where it gets tricky, because it might all be related, but if it's like a new thought, you're going to be breaking it up. So let's take a look at some of the examples here. This is how the story was actually broken up. This is a Hartford Courant story, and let's take a look at why it was broken up this way. So drivers chanted, they talk about what they chanted down Main Street. Here comes a new paragraph. Now we're talking about a specific driver, right? It's a new thought, right? So first we're talking about drivers in general, what they did. Now the new thought is, all right, well now let's talk about a specific driver and his experience. So now we talk about that specific driver here. Now we have another driver. Yes, they are both drivers, so I know some people will try to make the argument with me, yeah, but they're both drivers and that's related. Yeah, they're related, but again, it's a different thought. It's somebody new. It's a new idea, right? So make it a new paragraph. We've got this. It talks about, and this is why, look, it's still one, excuse me, it's still one paragraph because we're talking about his name, and then he's talking about CBS, and we're still mentioning CBS, so, and that he said that, right? So it's still one paragraph. Now we're talking about talk about other businesses. Lots of businesses have restrooms that require, right? So now it's a new paragraph. Then we get into a quote that one of them said. New paragraph. Hopefully you're starting to see the idea. It's a new thought. It's a transition. And then we go back to more drivers in general, and we talk about somebody else who said something. New paragraph. So if you're taking a look here, every time we have a new paragraph, it's like a new thought, a new idea. And it is all related. If you look at this whole paragraph here, it is the same story. It's related. That's not what I mean. But what I'm looking at is it kind of like a pause? Is it kind of like, we're maybe kind of switching gears just a little bit to give you a new piece of this story. When in doubt, break up your paragraphs. You're better off probably breaking up your paragraphs and then not breaking them up enough. So now I'm also not saying just make every single paragraph one sentence. That's not what I mean either. But if you're not sure, if you say, oh, I really can't tell. If you're not sure and you're really kind of debating that, it probably means it needs a new paragraph. And then same thing, I'm sorry, I already went ahead of it, but here, this is how it was all broken up. So breaking up paragraphs is going to be huge. Aim for 1 to 3 sentences. As soon as you start seeing 4 or 5, almost always I can guarantee that we could break that up. And then, like I said, even with 3, just because you have 3 doesn't mean that you're safe. That might even need to be broken up. So that's something that I noticed that we need to work on. Okay, what's wrong with this one? Subjective language. So remember, if it's not an op-ed, which we haven't covered yet in this class, if it's not opinion editorial, if it's not that kind of a piece that you're writing, if it's just a hard news story or a feature story, you, the journalist, keeping out your opinions. And not only are you keeping out your opinions, that means keeping out subjective language. So let's take a look at what I mean here. Rested after a week, the 1-5 UConn football team will head to Sunshine State to defeat undefeated Florida squad Saturday night. I know some people might argue with me that rested could be subjective language, but that's acceptable, right? Because they did have a week. We get what the reporter's talking about. Here's now where we get to real specific, egregious subjective language. Everyone in Connecticut will be cheering for their hometown Huskies to deliver South Florida's first loss. Well, I know this is not true because I won't be, right? Everyone in Connecticut will be cheering. No, not everybody in Connecticut. You can't guarantee to me that everyone will, and I know you're wrong if you say that because I won't be cheering. So everyone is. You can't be, putting that kind of language out there. There are other things you could say. You could say, Connecticut Husky fans will be cheering for. That's pretty safe to say, right? You could say many in Connecticut who will be rooting for their hometown. That's pretty safe. That's safe to say. There will be many in Connecticut. But thinking about trying to keep out that subjective language. Let's take a look at the next one. Unfortunately, it will be hot in Florida, so all the players and fans are going to have to going to the game are going to have to adjust for that. Well, we don't really know if it's unfortunately. Sure, some players might not want to play in the heat, and some fans might not want to go to the heat. Maybe there's some Florida players from UConn that come from warmer climates that feel more at home in the heat. Maybe a lot of fans, including me, like the heat better than the cold. I'd rather be at a game that's 100 degrees than a game that's 20 degrees. So I don't mind the heat, right? So when you say unfortunately, I know what you're trying to say here, but there's no reason to do it. You're putting a subjective language. Instead, just cut it out and just say it will be, fairly hot in Florida, or temperatures in Florida are expected to reach 95 degrees, and many players that have played in the cold will have to adjust, or the team that's been playing in cold weather will have a new climate to play in. You get what I'm saying? You can still give that fact, but just kind of you have to now reframe the way that you say it and make it so it's not subjective language. And then the last one, it's also lucky for fans that tickets to the South Florida game are only $25. $25 is pretty cheap, right? And I think that is a good deal. But, saying it's lucky for fans, maybe some fans, $25 is a lot. Maybe that's not a good deal for them. Maybe it's expensive because they have to get a plane ticket down there, and so they can't afford that. My point is, there's no reason to put in some subjective language like lucky. Just say, tickets are $25. You could compare it even. You could say, South Florida game tickets are $25 as opposed to UConn games, I don't even know, that are, 80 or 100 or whatever it is. So you could still mention this fact, but don't just be putting in subjective language. You got to take yourself out, and it's hard to do. I gave some of the egregious examples here, but there are others that are maybe a little bit more subtle that you slip in that are like kind of walking the line of opinion. So, you don't have to get crazy with this. Don't, like I said, even saying, rested after a week. Well, rested could be, yeah, I do understand that. But look for the ones that are obvious. When you're overgeneralizing, everyone in Connecticut. Like this could have been a bad sentence if you said, everyone on the UConn team feels rested and healthy after their week off. Maybe not. Maybe some of those players feel a little better, but they're still, kind of beat up, whatever. So there is like that fine line. Anytime you see something that you think is very subjective, just cut it out and rewrite it in a different way. And again, you can always err on the side of caution for this. Better on the side of caution than putting in subjective language. All right, and here's another one. This one could be a little tricky, I know. Quotes. Not leading with the quote. And what I mean by that is, let's take a look at this first one. Vijay, I'm going to probably say the name wrong, Singh, a U.S. veteran, said when he was asked about how he felt, I'm proud, I'm motivated to become a U.S. citizen. Well, the first problem with that is just lead with the quote. Even if you haven't mentioned the person's name yet, I'm proud of it, I'm motivated to become a U.S. citizen, and then you say the name, said the person, right? So start the sentence with a quote and then attribute it, and always use said. You do this because the quote is the most important part of that paragraph. It's the thing that's going to stick out the most. You don't want to bury it, just like we say don't bury the lead, right? You don't want to bury the quote later on in the sentence. As we're reading, we have an ability to quickly figure out what's going on. So we read the quote, a reader reads the quote, processes it, and then we figure out who it was attributed to, and then we can quickly, within 10 seconds, 5 seconds, attribute and figure out, like, okay, now I know the context, now I know who said it. It's okay. It's not only is it okay, you should lead with the quote first and then give the attribution. Something else you want to do, if you notice where I said, when asked about how he felt, do not put, and in fact, you know what I'm going to do after I stop this video? I'm going to include that in my little answer here. Do not put when asked about. We know that that's what he was asked about, right? Because that's why we're getting the quote from him. We know that you had to do that. These are just clutter words, or just extra words. You don't need it. This is much more powerful. Instead of saying the name, when asked about, and then you get to quote, I'm proud of it, that motivated me to be a U.S. citizen. Bam, say the name. That sentence is going to stick out in somebody's mind way more than all of this. So say you have the same deal down here. You don't want to lead with this part. You're going to lead with a quote. And also, get rid of these kind of words. He went on to state, or I'm trying to think of another word besides state. He explained, and then you say the quote. Just use said. Just say the quote and then said, said the person, or said sing said, whatever. Just get said in there instead. Again, I know what I'll get from students. They'll often say, well, I don't want to keep using said. It's the same word. I want to mix it up. And I know that's a lesson we all learned before in high school. And it's true. But for this, the quote is the spice. That's the most important thing, right? That quote is the most important thing. That's the thing that we're caring about and we're remembering. So by changing the word said, that's not really doing anything because we're remembering the quotes. If you keep trying to change it and said explained and stated and all that, it's just not needed. Say said, it's neutral, and again, the quote is the thing that we're changing around. That's what's keeping people's attention. So just use said, it's a neutral word. You won't get yourself in danger, because sometimes you might even get yourself in danger for putting subjective language in. If you say, happily, well, I don't even go down this rabbit hole. So there's other words that people say sometimes, like shouted. They'll say, blah, 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 shouted. And maybe he raised his voice, but did it really raise the level of a shout? That can kind of be subjective. So by just using said, you avoid all those problems. Now I'm kind of just trailing off here, but bottom line, say the quote first, attribute it to the person, and use the word said. If you keep that combination, you're golden. I will just say, I understand and I know that this is not a hard, fast rule, meaning you will read stories where they don't always do this, and sometimes things are led before. And it's kind of like, you have to know the rules to break the rules, or they do it intentionally for a reason. So I mean, I'm not saying you can never do this, but right now, again, while you're learning, while you're just starting in your journalistic writing, education here, do it this way. This is like the standard. This is the way you're going to do it 90% of the time. So learn how to do it this way, and as you get more advanced, then you kind of figure out when you bend those rules, because there's a reason usually to do it. For right now, though, here's the formula: quote, attribute it, said, right? That's the formula that you got to know. Okay, hopefully this cleared up those answers that you maybe saw after you did yours. You could always go back now, take a look at your answers, or see what you did and see if it makes sense. If any of this is confusing, of course, let me know. But this is the next level now, right? This is the next level to your feature story. This is the kind of thing that I'm going to, part of what I'm going to be grading for, to see that you're taking these lessons and now applying it and getting a little bit better in your writing.